The town is that where the meeting house is located is about 6,000 people, and it's a rural area surrounded by a bunch of other rural towns of about 3 to 4 to 6,000 people. And so there's about four little towns that meet in this ward. And the building is small. The chapel and the cultural hall is the same thing. So it's like the carpeted chapel that you close the little curtain to section off the stage, and then it becomes a culture hall. So you don't desecrate the chapel part of it. And there's a couple of funky bathrooms and some classrooms and a kitchen you can fit one person in it comfortably and four people in it miserably. So it's a pretty small kitchen. Biggest room is the primary, which has two curtain dividers that we use every Sunday. The surrounding towns are about 15 minutes away at the nearest, and the outskirts of the ward boundaries go out about an hour, depending. Like if you were to drive from one boundary to the other, the ward boundaries are like an hour and a half by an hour or something like that. Hour and a half by 45 minutes. And originally that was kind of interesting, just getting used to the driving, or the not driving, not being close to your ward friends and stuff. But because of this, it has a branch feeling to it. We were a branch up until recently. When we moved in 10 years ago or so, there was an active membership of maybe 80, and now there's an active membership of maybe 100. And so we were made a ward not too long ago, but it hasn't really changed much of the vibe. And so that's kind of the logistical layout of the unit. And then I would go into like the vibes of what it was like when I first arrived and stuff. Did I cover logistics?
Let me just add that the meeting house is at the end of a dead end road, and it's just outside of town. And so you drive through some nice houses, not nice, but it's a nice little neighborhood on this dead end road that goes out to the building.
So
Do you know if the entire meeting house was built at the same time?
no, it was not. So yeah, it's not in the middle of town. A lot of church buildings, I think, get a lot of community traffic, just from the streets nearby, and this one does not. You would never know it's there unless you were invited to go back into that corner of the neighborhood. And so it is tucked away. The church is about 50 years old from the earliest part that was built, and the part that was built first was the classrooms. I'm pretty sure I'm getting this right. So they built the classrooms first with this little kitchen and a couple little bathrooms, and they basically met in what is now the primary for a little bit. And then after that, they built a chapel years later, which was a big thing. And when they built the chapel, they had plans to build a second half, like a cultural hall half, and it did not get built, but all of the plans are still there. Like you can tell the building just ends, and then there's like this space with the lawn that's available for the next phase, but it never got built. So it's a very unique building, and I don't, there's some pros about it. Like there's a little bit of lawn space, and there's a decent little parking lot and stuff. But it's mostly just kind of odd. Like it's just not your typical setup.
You have that grassy area in the back, a pretty good sized grassy area where the kids love to run and play. And
Yeah. And it is a quiet neighborhood. I mean, I said it's out of the way. So it's actually, what's interesting that probably a lot of people in the ward don't realize, but I know because I'm there during the week for facilities and stuff, that there are lots of people that use that parking lot as their lunch break parking lot. And about half of them are neighbors, because the neighbors obviously know the church is there, but there's not very many neighbors. I mean, there's maybe 20 neighbors. They realize there's a church there and they use it for their walks and their dogs and like whatever. But the other half of the people are the delivery drivers. We get tons of mailmen, FedEx, UPS. They pull into that parking lot and take a lunch break. And, they discovered it on their route. They just saw it and they know the church. They know it's a safe place. Nobody's going to bug them. They're not going to make a mess. So we get tons of people. We get probably half a dozen people stopping there every day around lunchtime to take a little break. So yeah, it's funny.
So I think it's the only building that I've ever seen where, like you said, the chapel and the culture hall are the same space. And instead of the folding curtain cutting across the seating, it cuts across right in front of the podium, and the chairs are not permanently installed in any way. So when you want to use it for recreational activities, you pull the curtain right in front of the podium and block off the podium and the stand, and then you have the space for recreational activities.
The other thing that's weird that is has its pros and cons for the security team is that the chapel is exposed on two sides to exterior walls. Well, I guess three sides technically. So you have one main entrance to get into the building, which is the same main entrance to get into the chapel. There isn't, like, you can't get to the chapel from two sides like a traditional LDS chapel. You have to go, it's everybody's going in the same way, everybody's going out the same way. There are two emergency doors on the far side that you can always exit, but you can't get in. And so the security guy is always kind of keeping an eye on things. Yeah, it's just kind of a different setup. But I remember in Mexico, a lot of the buildings were set up the same, not the same, but you would walk in between these two edifices, and one on one side would be the chapel, and it was just the chapel, exposed exterior walls, all four sides, big windows that open up, let the air through. So it was a big chapel on one side, and then just a few feet away was another big building that was just a row of classrooms. And so there was like this little glass hall that would connect the two, but it was the same setup where everybody would walk in the same door to the chapel, and everybody would leave through the same door. So yeah, now that I think of it, it's similar. It looks completely different, but it's a similar logistical setup. So anyway, should we get into the like my first impressions?
Yeah.
So I never spent a lot of time in any of the stateside branches. Going to this branch, and it's a really cool vibe, not a ton of people. And over the first couple of weeks, I started realizing that this was going to be an awesome experience, not just because the branch is awesome, but because a small congregation is awesome. And I'll kind of, I guess, start with the end, because recently I heard David Boyce talking about this phenomenon of people starting to realize how much power there is in a small congregation, because there was a mega church leader that walked away from his mega church and started doing home church because he realized that the mega church was just too distracting, too much production. He wanted to get back to something more spiritual and connected, and that is the small congregation home church. And I think that's exactly what was going on when I first arrived at this branch, now ward, is that I was realizing how cool it was to be in a small congregation, having been in congregations of 200 or 300 active members, and not knowing any different. So there's a lot of cool stuff. Some of the stuff that's not cool is that if there's not enough members, like if there's 40 members, then you have a leadership problem, because the same people are going to be asked to do leadership stuff over and over again just because they're dependable. But I think once you hit this kind of 70 to 100 mark, there's enough leadership that you can really move around in different positions and do some really cool stuff, but it's not so big that you get lost. And that's what I thought was cool, is like, everybody's name, what's going on, you're helping each other. Like if something happens, that you got to show up, because there's only 5 guys that are ever going to show up and you're one of them. So you have to be there. You can't just be like, oh, well, there's 30 elders, so it'll be somebody else will pick it up. It's like, no, like you got to go and you got to do it, because there's not a lot of us around. We really depend on each other in that way.
I'll just give you my impression, and you can verify it or not, that that in your ward, You particularly have had the opportunity to have a calling or two that you would not have had in a larger ward, and that they don't park people in positions for years and years, which
Yeah.
I think sometimes happens in not traditional wards, larger wards.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. I know a
Like
few.
you were primary chorister,
Mhm.
and I've never seen a brother be primary chorister.
Yeah, that should probably be its own discussion. Let me write that down. But yeah, I'm trying to imagine or remember if there's been any long-standing call-ins, and there has been a few, um, but it is pretty exceptional. It's more the case that one person gets shuffled and everybody's kind of required to do the dance because there's just not, we don't have a surplus of people. Like right now, for example, we're trying to figure out who's going to teach the youth Sunday school class. And it's hard because everybody has a calling. There's not a line of people that don't have callings, and we're just like, oh, okay, let's see. Yep, I think it's him. There's a few people that we have that we want to call, and then we talk to Bishop, and they're like, and he's like, no, they already have 3 callings. We can't get them to do another calling. And so it's hard, but I don't know. I would rather that than have a bunch of members with nothing to do, because in my personal experience, hold on, let me write this down before I forget. I really like the opportunity to call people to positions that they would not normally be considered in, and I don't do it willy-nilly. Like I really think about it and I pray about it and I hope that the person has success. But I've been able to help people, I think, get into callings that they thought were outside their reach, outside their potential. And it's a lot easier to do that here because I don't have a lot of options. I've got like maybe 3 or 4 people that I can refer into a calling. Um, and of those 3 or 4 people, one of them might be like the least obvious choice, but I can still recommend them because Bishop's not going to be like, what? No, like, why wouldn't you choose one of the 20 other guys? I can just be like, no, this is the guy that I prayed about. He's one of the options. Like, there's not a lot of us around, and I want to give him a shot. And it's always worked out really well. It's never backfired or anything. But I don't know if those kinds of considerations are made very easily in the big wards, the mega wards. I do think that one of the problems in like the spectrum of activity is that in a group of 100 people, you have, I don't know, maybe 10 people that are always there. Like they're always showing up, they're always doing stuff, they always get asked to do stuff. And so the habit is to ask the people that always show up to do the stuff, right? And in a big ward, it's easier because that's like 20 people or 30 people. And so you can kind of spread out that burden, if you will. But in a ward where with 100 people, the same 10 people are getting asked to do the same thing all the time. And that can be a little bit rough. And I tend to challenge people a little bit on that, like, hey, why didn't you call so and so? Like, he could do it, but you don't think of him for whatever reason. Like, we can spread it out a little bit more. So that can be, it can be hard to break that mold, but again, that probably goes into a different conversation around people's mindset and stigma and habits and patterns and laziness and fear and why people don't do that. And people have actually talked to me about like I could never do what you do, right? That you going out of your way to go and get that person and have them help you with that project, that would be hard for me. And I'd be like, yeah, but it's a lot easier when it's a small group. And we really rely on the arms and legs to be able to do the projects. And so I have no problem going to the people who are not typically considered for that kind of thing.
So you've talked to me in the past about how your ward is a place of healing. Do you want to talk about that now, or is that its own discussion?
No, it's probably the same. In my mind, it's the same discussion because, well, I don't know exactly why, but I've got some theories. The smaller the unit, the more it feels like family, and the less, the harder it is to hide. And so when you have a problem, In a big ward, you just hide. You just don't show up for a few weeks. You just wear a different colored shirt. Like you just do whatever you can to make yourself not noticeable. In a small ward, you ask one person for help, and pretty quickly everybody kind of gets a hint that something's going on, which can be hard if you don't trust your unit. But again, in a small unit, you kind of have to build trust or else you don't survive. And it is this feedback loop where it kind of feeds into the healing, because when there's a problem, everybody's there to support, everybody's there to love, and it's great. And you can't hide your problem, so you have to face it. And so when you face your problem, you're finding the healing, and then you become part of the healing, because pretty soon the whole ward is built of a bunch of people who have gone through all of these healing things. Like we've got people who have been in major car wrecks, we've got the divorces, we got the separations, we got the adoptions, we've got all kinds of, job loss. We've got everything.
Disabled children.
Everything, the cancer, like we've got everything. Everybody's kind of been through it. And so we have practice now, building that trust and exercising that trust to the point where when something comes up, people aren't so afraid to be like, oh, I hope nobody finds out, because they might, shun me. It's like, please, if we were shunning you, we nobody would be here to shun you, because we are all shun worthy. It's ridiculous.
So I have to say that we went to a ward activity, and Dad had just gotten home from work, and he was dusty and dirty, and his clothes were pretty dirty. And I said, okay, we're going to Denton's ward. Maybe you ought to shower and clean up. So he did. And then we get there, and it's a fundraiser, a recreational activity. And the bishop is there playing a major role. And he is just as dirty as Dad was before he cleaned up to come.
Oh yeah, he's a cowboy. So he was coming by, smelling like he was hauling cows all day, and did a great job hosting the event. Yeah, and that. So one of the things that you brought up before was that we get away with things, right? And I think that's, there's some pros and cons to that. But the things that the things that we get away with are the things that everybody wishes they could get away with, right? Like nobody's getting away with doing anything embarrassing or anything like that. But yeah, Dad wishes that he could show up to his ward in his grunge, and we have stuff like that come up all the time. Last week, the priest that blessed the sacrament was wearing a blue polo shirt, and I can guarantee nobody said anything to anybody. Nobody cares. As long as he's there, he's a convert kid doing great. And nobody cares as long as he's doing his job well and he's respectful, which he is. And as long as Bishop's okay with it, which he is, and Bishop doesn't just let anything fly, but we have a deep respect for people who are on the path trying to figure out how to make things work. And we're not going to sit there and be like, oh, sorry, bro, you didn't show up in the right clothes, so you can't bless the sacrament. Try again next week. It's just a stupid idea to think that anything like that would be worth our time. But that happens all the time. I mean, the sisters show up in pants. We've had discussions of like, what do we do with so-and-so because they aren't showing up appropriately. And, we'll kind of throw around some ideas and stuff, but there's never an idea of like, oh, the bishop needs to pull him into his office. Like, that's just so dumb to be like, oh, the bishop's responsibility is to pull so-and-so into the office and make sure that they understand that their V-neck can't come down that low. That's so stupid. It would be more like, hey, as the Relief Society president, ever talk to the Relief Society counselors to see if there's a sister that knows her well enough that might be able to like bring that up in casual conversation? Yeah, that's pretty easy because she's friends with so-and-so. They hang out because their kids go to school together. Like that's where that goes. Which again is building trust with the people that we're trying to help better themselves. And that specific example, I'm sure has never happened, but I can think of other examples. And I've been a part of those too. And my experience is that, the more straightforward and honest you are with people, the more responsive they are. And it works well for us to do that. Oh, going back to like what we get away with, I think it helps that we're not sharing a building with another ward. I think it helps that we don't get visitors from the stake every Sunday. I think it helps that we're not all like living on the same block and seeing each other day to day. And so we give each other a little bit of space, a little bit of liberty to live each other's lives because we're not like babysitting each other all the time. What else? I think it helps that we've created a place of healing and the expectation is far from perfect or even like the Mormon stereotype. You know, I don't know, like bishop will sometimes wear a bolo tie. We have a bishop's counselor recently that wore bow ties all the time. And they have beards in the bishopric, which you're not supposed to have because it's a bad thing to wear a beard at church, whatever. And nobody cares. And it's not because, you know, there's a lack of faith or commitment or whatever. It's just because there's more important things to do. I think it's getting a little dark in here. So, yeah, I really like the ward, and I've thought a lot about why it is the way it is. And those are some of my theories. But we regularly have people move in. I would say once a year, somebody moves in that would obviously not be the perfect fit for the stereotypical ward. And they're a perfect fit for us just because, you know, we're like, more the better, like no shame, no game, let's go. What do you got to bring? And maybe they live in a trailer, or maybe they have way too many cats. You know, it doesn't, nobody really cares. Like we've all got the things, and we're not here to judge. And so we've got like a beautiful bouquet of people that are just all over the place. There was one other thing I was going to say. What was it?
I think you're right about how it does feel more like a family than a larger ward. I mean, that's the feeling I get when I go.
Yeah. Yeah. So I like it. But yeah, I do think there's oh, that's what I was going to say. There is a reason why wards are typically big, and that's because the buildings, like we can't build enough buildings. Like we know people in Utah that are sharing a modest sized building with what, 4 wards or something ridiculous. And that's on the extreme side, but I know towns here, 100,000 people, and a couple buildings share, or a couple wards will share a building. And both the wards are 200 and 300 people per ward. And it's because in order to divide it up so that there was like 70 to 80 people per ward, you would need twice to 3 times as many buildings. And it's just a lot more overhead. And it's a lot harder. So I get why the wards are big, but I I would suggest that, you know, come the time of, you know, when it comes time to taking the work seriously, whether that's like Millennium or whatever, that you will see congregations get smaller and smaller, not bigger and bigger. They'll get as small as possible. And that you will see congregations that are, you know, families, like they really think of themselves as families, and they'll be tight knit. I think it'd be really cool to see that. So yeah, I think the big wards are overrated. All right, I think that's about all I got. Any other thoughts? It would be interesting to talk to people who love big wards and why they love big wards. Because I have a friend who loved this big ward that he was in, but when I asked him about it, it was really because the people were so laid back. It wasn't because it was a big ward, it was just because the people were laid back and the people were good to him. But I can imagine for somebody, you know, like some super social busybody type of person, that the big ward would be cool because you could have multiple friend groups and lots of stuff like that going on. But I'm definitely not like that. I'm not like the metropolitan type. I'm more, you know, let's party one day of the week and then don't talk to me for the next 6 days. That's more my
I
stuff.
suppose a big ward is easier on a bishop who's trying to staff positions, right? So
Yeah, I guess. I don't know. I've never been bishop, but I think that'll be a topic for another time too, is like, because I see bishops all my life that I see them doing things and I'm like, are you required to do it that way? Because that seems like a really hard way to do that. All right. So we will talk to you next time.
yeah.
All right.